2561 A leisurely ride. Soon, Neffy's and her dream gate were gone. Sunny dismissed his as well and found himself standing alone on the scorched earth of the desolate wasteland, beneath the vast blue sky of the eastern quadrant. The idea that he was completely safe, for once in his life, felt alien. What a strange day. Sunny knew that the world was going to be shaken quite soon. People would learn that the desperate war against the Skinwalker had come to a sudden end. That alone was enough to cause quite a tumult. This news would be followed by the shocking revelation that a new sovereign had risen to the throne of supremacy, and that he was none other than Mordred, the wayward son of the King of Swords. The public did not know much about Mordred, except for the fact that he had betrayed his clan, destroyed the House of Night on the Queen's orders, and nearly conquered the Sword Domain all on his own while the war was raging in Godgrave. Actually, now that Sunny thought about it, perhaps people would not be as surprised that Mordred had become a sovereign as he was. What mattered more was the fact that the general public was not aware of his own continued existence, and neither did countless people know that Astarion was alive and supreme, as well. So, for most people, the King of Nothing would seem to be the only sovereign in existence apart from Changing Star. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he would seem like the second most important person in the world. And that person was an eerie fiend who possessed 1,000,000 bodies and chose to dwell in the cold mists of the Hollow Mountains instead of living among people. Poor humanity. It seems to only have 2 demigods, and half of all demigods it has are completely mad. The saddest part was that if everyone knew that there were actually 4 Supremes alive today, the proportion would not get any better. Arguably, it would only get worse. Not to mention that people who regarded Neffys as a sane person were woefully wrong. So, really, all of the human demigods were some kind of unhinged. Ignorance is truly bliss. Shaking his head, Sunny glanced around and took in the view of the cleansed continent. The sun was falling toward the horizon by then, so his shadow lay long on the ground. He called, and a tenebrous steed rose from his shadow, casting the dreadful gaze of its crimson eyes down at him. The sun glinted on its wolf-like fangs and adamantine horns. Nightmare snorted quietly, and the resulting gust of wind made Sunny's hair dance chaotically. He grimaced, then brushed his hair away from his eyes and glanced at Nightmare with a smile. "I missed you too, buddy." Climbing into the saddle, Sunny sent his destrier toward the coast. He was currently near the very heart of the eastern quadrant, so the 2 of them would have to cross the entire continent to reach the water where the Night Garden rested on the waves, so Nightmare could cross it in a few hours at a leisurely pace. Of course, Sunny himself could reach the coast even faster if he used Shadow Step. However, he was not in a hurry. His other incarnations were already quite busy, but this one could take a well-deserved break. After all, it was not every day that one encountered an entire continent devoid of nightmare creatures. That never happened, in fact. The eastern quadrant was like a park at the moment, so Sunny was in the mood for a little sightseeing. He wanted to gather his thoughts before meeting Jet, as well. A lot had happened in the last couple of months. His incarnations had not been idle during his stay in the Palace of Imagination, and he was quite busy in the weeks after regaining his senses as well. Now, there was this whole story with Mordred. Gods, that devious bastard was really supreme now, and Astarion was looming over the world, as well. Somehow, Sunny had a feeling that he would not experience a moment of peace like this one in a long while. I might be forced to change my plans. 2 fragments of Weaver's lineage remained unclaimed, the Spirit Weave and the Shadow Weave. The former was presumably hidden somewhere on the Night Garden, or at least connected to it, while the latter was lost in the dark depths of the underworld. Sunny had made a tentative plan to recover all parts of Weaver's lineage one after another, or at least attempt to. Now, however, it seemed like an expedition into the underworld would have to be postponed until after Astarion was dealt with. That saddened him a little. I've grown so much stronger after assimilating Flesh Weave and Mind Weave. There was also the peculiar case of the Blood Weave, Bone Weave, and Flesh Weave fusing and enhancing each other. So, he had reason to believe that a similar kind of synergy, perhaps even on a much larger scale, would happen when the entire lineage was reassembled. And he was also sure that absorbing both Spirit Weave and Shadow Weave would hurt like hell. Sunny sighed, already uncomfortable by simply thinking about that inevitable future. Once I collect all 7 fragments, though, then, he would be ready to challenge the 5th nightmare. If he was going to challenge it, after all, instead of searching for a way to reach apotheosis without the help of the spell. As Nightmare galloped across the wasteland, Sunny thought back to what had happened in the last few weeks. I actually can't believe how much transpired in that short amount of time. It had really been a month full of all kinds of happenings. Let's see, what had happened first? Oh, right, it was the little gift he sent to teacher Julius, the crowning achievement and the last nail in the coffin of his academic career. His magnum opus, as far as academic research went. 2562 magnum opus. While one of Sunny's incarnations was experiencing the strangest things in the palace of imagination, like PTVs that drove on tiny explosions and a whole city of people who had no idea what an abomination was, the rest of him was busy with other endeavors. In fact, he had more free time than usual. That was because Slayer was still resting in the dark flames of his soul, evolving, so there was no need to fight her every week, and neither was there a need to recover from those brutal fights, either. So, Sunny decided to do something he had been thinking about ever since returning from Ariel's game. He wanted to write a research paper, and not just any paper at that. Sunny wanted to write a paper to end all papers. The best and most comprehensive report on the history of the world, its inception, its end, and all the things that had happened since. After all, he was in a unique position. Sunny was the person who knew the most about the truth of things, the gods, the demons, the Nine, the Void, the Forgotten God. Most importantly, he knew the most about Weaver and the purpose of the nightmare spell. Of course, there were still gaps in his knowledge. Other people possessed pieces of knowledge that he did not, as well. The sovereigns, for example, had known much more than he did about certain things. Among them, Astarion probably knew secrets that Sunny could not even dream about. But nobody had such a structured and comprehensive knowledge of the framework that formed all of existence, as well as the main characters of history and the roles they had played. Knowledge was power, so it was no surprise that the sovereigns had hoarded their knowledge, refusing to share it with anyone. But Sunny was of a different mind. Nephis was the Sam-E, or she would not have given her fateful speech about how Earth was doomed to be consumed by the Dream Realm. Since he possessed precious knowledge, he wanted to share it with the world. He had an obligation to let people learn as much as possible about the reality they lived in, not only because he knew how fervently those curious about the truth strived to quench their thirst for knowledge, but also because he wanted as many people to be as powerful as they could be. After all, Sunny was not the only person with a keen mind out there. If many people were armed with the knowledge he possessed, some of them would use it as ammunition to make their own discoveries and help humanity in their own way. That, in truth, was the greatest power humanity possessed, the ability to accumulate knowledge and, therefore, solve problems collectively. Every new generation of humans was the culmination of everything the many previous generations had learned and achieved, so their growth was exponential. At least that was what Sunny wanted to believe as a former academic. His tenure at the academy might have come to an abrupt end, but the spirit of exploration still burned in his heart. And it was in that spirit that Sunny sat behind a desk in the dark castle and stared at an empty journal in front of him. The journal in and of itself was a mythical artifact. That was because Sunny had been too lazy to go find writing paper and just manifested shadows into a semblance of one, making each sheet permanent. Then, he bound the white sheets with black thread and fashioned a leather cover from the hide of an abomination he had slain in the burned forest. The ink was made from the materials scavenged here on the Forgotten Shore. And since Sunny was now a demigod, everything he made was technically a mythical item. That said, he would have vastly preferred to just type the entire research paper on a communicator, but sadly, that would require writing it in the waking world, and while Sunny could very well spend some time there, it was never pleasant. So, with a sigh, he began writing by hand. The first thing he wrote was the title, of course, which was quite easy and to the point. On the first page of the journal, a few words appeared under his pen. The letters read, "The Exploration Report on Everything, by Nobody. Sonk." Many days later, having already received Mind Weave, Sunny did travel to the waking world, after all. The journal containing the exploration report felt heavy in his hand. He put all of the knowledge about the history and fate of the Dream Realm onto these pages. The exploration report on the tomb of Ariel concentrated on the nature of the Great River civilization and on the stories of Weave told to him by Ananke, omitting the truths learned by him in the estuary. But this time, Sunny shared everything he knew. He wrote about the inception of the world, the gods and their forgotten sibling, the origin of the demons, the cause of the conflict between the demons and the gods, as well as the calamitous end of their war, Weaver, and the birth and purpose of the nightmare spell. He wrote about the 7 divine realms, as well, about how the dream realm came to be, how it consumed the Mortal realms, how the nightmare spell infected the isolated divine realms one after another, and how they still ended up being swallowed by the growing realm of the forgotten god, with Earth, War Realm, being the last. And much more. So much more, in fact, that his hands still seemed to be hurting from holding the pen, and that's considering that he had manifested a few additional hands out of the shadows to hasten the process. In fact, Sunny had written 2 versions of the exploration report on everything, instead of one. The first contained all that knowledge in its pure form. The second replaced the name of the forgotten god, Dream God, with a rune for someone, or something, unknown. That was because not just anyone could retain the forbidden knowledge about the forgotten god. Actually, few people could, and even for them, it was somewhat perilous. Even mentioning his existence put a strain on the souls of living beings, because the world was still denying his existence. So, Sunny only intended to share the full version of his report with those of higher ranks. Now, all that remained was to deliver the fruit of his decade-long quest to uncover the truth into the hands of the public. Standing in front of the gigantic gates, Sunny glanced up and studied the familiar form of a towering alloy wall. After so many years of having been away, he returned to the Awakened Academy. 2563 Old Haunts. Sunny and Nefis had stood on this exact spot 11 years ago, waiting for the gates of the academy to open for them. Well, it had been 11 years for the world, but a full dozen for them, considering the time spent in the tomb of Ariel. It was funny to think that they had not even known each other back then. They had not paid much attention to each other, either. Sunny had been busy thinking about the advice given to him by Jet during the drive from the police station, while Nefis was listening to music and looking at the walls of the academy with an aloof expression. They had just become sleepers. And now, 12 years later, they were both supreme. They were demigods wielding power so terrifying that the towering walls of the academy, which had seemed impossible to breach once, were not even worth thinking about. Sunny and Nefis were capable of conquering all of Earth now, or destroying it, if they so wished. How times have changed. Sunny could not help but think about how much that short conversation with Jet had shaped his life. She had shared a few pieces of priceless wisdom with him back then, wisdom that she herself had earned by making mistakes and paying for each one with blood. Among other things, Sunny would have never chosen to dedicate his time at the academy to learning how to survive in the wilderness. He would have spent those few weeks training uselessly with a sword, instead. Then, he would not have had the knowledge to piece together the past of the Forgotten Shore, which was the start of it all. In fact, he would have drowned immediately after entering the Dream Realm on the winter solstice. It was Teacher Julius, after all, who had insisted that Sunny learns how to swim. It is strange to think that my life could have ended so ingloriously all the way back then. A future sovereign died as a sleeper because he didn't know how to swim. That would have been quite a twist of fate. Shaking his head, Sunny glanced at the gates of the academy. The sea of candles in front of them still burned. They had been placed there by those who hoped for Changing Star's safe return after the siege of the Crimson Spire, initially, but people continued to light new candles even now that Nefis was supreme and ruled the entire world. If anything, there were more candles burning in front of the academy than ever before. The sea of fragile flames was very much like humanity itself, each one representing someone's hopes and dreams. Individual flames could be extinguished and snuffed out, but the radiance of the candles as a whole never dimmed. If The was a physical representation of the human domain, this was it, the immortal flame that refused to go out, fueled by longing. And, of course, each of the myriad candles had a shadow. No one was going to open the gates of the academy for Sunny this time, and he did not need them either. Instead, he simply stepped through the shadows and entered the academy grounds unannounced, moving unseen. This soon after the winter solstice, there were not many sleepers attending, so Sunny did not need to exert himself even a little to remain unnoticed. He cast his shadow sense far and wide, easily encompassing the entire academy, and sensed every person within its walls, the students, the instructors, and the staff. Then, following an odd impulse, Sunny spent some time visiting his old haunts and remembering the past. The assembly hall where he had met Cassie for the first time, both of them assumed to be no different from Walking Dead and relegated to the corpse corner, his small room in the sleeper dormitory, gods, it had felt like the pinnacle of luxury back then. The cafeteria where he had enjoyed good food for the first time in his life, the lecture hall where he had taught a class of unruly sleepers as a guest lecturer, the fortified room on one of the underground levels of the academy's medical center where Nefis had been kept while wandering the dream realm alone, that one had been renovated after being blown up, and a few more places. All of them contained memories that were meaningful to him. These memories were like ghosts, No one else remembered to cherish these quiet moments, and they only continued to exist in his head. All traces of the life Sunny had lived were erased from the world, and the places he visited did not mean anything to anyone anymore, not in the same way they meant the world to him, at least. Sunny was not exactly a sentimental person, so it was strange to find himself wasting time on a walk down memory lane. But it was just that, he had a feeling that he would not return to the Awakened Academy ever again. Entering the waking world was getting hard now that he was supreme, and it would only get harder in the future. Earth itself was changing, too, dying, really. So, Sunny had a feeling that the next time he saw the Academy, it would be as a ruin lost in some godforsaken corner of the dream realm. But that was all right, as well. Time was flowing, and humanity was doing its best not to fall behind its current. The nature of the awakening was different now compared to when he had been a sleeper. More and more of those infected by the nightmare spell resided in the dream realm, and so, the way they were taught was changing as well. There were already branches of the academy in the dream realm. The first one had been opened in Ravenheart, while the second one was located in Bastion. Granted, they focused more on preparing young men and women who wanted to challenge the first nightmare for its terrible demands. The trial of the winter solstice itself was going to become a thing of the past before too long. After all, there would be no distinction between the dream realm and the waking world anymore, so the spell would have no need and no reason to send sleepers on a fatal pilgrimage. Awakened live long lives, and someone like Sunny was almost immortal. When he glanced at the world in 100 years, would there be anything left behind from the one that he knew? Letting out a quiet sigh, Sunny glanced around one last time, then made his way to the wilderness survival classroom. Actually, Teacher Julius did not teach here anymore. He and his family resided permanently in Bastion now, and the old man spent his days building a new education system for the courageous new world being built in the dream realm by the human domain. But he still visited NQSC occasionally, and when he did, this classroom served as his office. Walking over to the desk, Sunny placed the journal on its surface and studied it for a few moments. Then, hearing someone opening the door, he dissolved into the shadows. His job here was done. He had submitted his last research paper to the man he trusted to treat it caringly the most. And what a research paper it was. Sunny sighed bitterly. Oh, gods, all the contribution points I am missing out on. Ah, my heart hurts. 2564 Wayward Student. Teacher Julius had never expected his twilight years to be so very busy. He remembered thinking of retiring a few years back. The world was constantly changing, and he was afraid of not being able to keep pace with it. As much as it pained him to admit, his lessons, which had been vital for innumerable young sleepers in the past, had not had high attendance in a long, long while. That was only natural, considering that awakened of the second and third generations, gods, were they on the fourth generation, already, had absorbed most skills necessary for survival in the wilderness of the dream realm as children. Granted, those school curricula were quite shallow, never delving deeply into the subjects he felt passionate about. So, Julius had thought about hanging his hat. Who knew that he and his family would become so involved with building a brighter future for humanity on behalf of the new domain? His wife was doing important work helping refugees settle in Bastion, for example. Julius himself, meanwhile, had found himself in charge of developing an entire new education system for youths residing in the dream realm. There was so much he and the team of academics under his leadership had to consider, envision, and implement. After all, they not only needed to make sure that children taken to the dream realm learned everything they needed to know about that dangerous world and developed into competent adults, they also needed to make sure that children that would be born in the dream realm in the future did not forget their roots, inheriting the knowledge and culture of Earth. Which, apparently, was not long for this world. Soon enough, Earth would become a part of the dream realm, too, a fact that he was still trying to come to terms with. In any case, Julius had spent most of his time in Bastion, since that was where the governing institutions of humanity were slowly migrating. His life there was both eventful and meaningful, but he still enjoyed his rare visits to NQSC. After all, this was where he had spent most of his life, especially the familiar grounds of the Awakened Academy. Julius took his time walking along the paths of the Academy Park before entering the sleeper compound and making his way to his former classroom. This was where his NQSC office was now located. Despite knowing how numerous calls and communications with valued colleagues who still resided on Earth awaited him, his gait was ginger and energetic, and he was humming a boisterous tune. Better finish everything quickly, get all the planned social engagements out of the way, and get back home. There was something new and exciting happening in Bastion every day. Not too long ago, young Bethany finally managed to launch her ambitious hydroelectric power plant. Now, a magical tramway was being built along the main thoroughfare, and there were myriad other things being created and invented as well. Julius did not want to miss anything. Sadly, he knew that many of his colleagues were quite stubborn and cantankerous. So, the scheduled meetings were probably going to run late, especially because his old academic rival, Sando, who was not as smug these days, but still a complete hack, would be participating in one of them. Let's see, it's almost time for the call with the Song Foundation, huh? What is that? Julius blinked a couple of times, which caused his bushy eyebrows to perform a complicated and faintly frightening dance. There, on his table, lay something that he did not recognize. It was a leather-bound journal that looked quite mundane, but emanated a daunting feeling of something uncanny, almost mystical. There was also a handwritten note placed near it, with neat cursive filling it. The paper was black, and the ink was silver-white. The note looked like a piece of the dark sky that someone had cut carelessly from the fabric of the night, taking the stars and starlight with it. Julius scratched the tip of his nose. Did I forget to lock the door? The Awakened Academy was a restricted area with heavy security, so no one was supposed to be able to enter his office unannounced. His curiosity won over his caution, though, well, of course, and Julius picked up the note after sitting behind the desk. His eyebrows climbed higher and higher as he read it. The neat handwriting read, "Teacher Julius, you probably don't remember me, but I was once your student. Many years have passed since the days I attended the Awakened Academy, yet I always remember your lessons fondly. They are the reason I survived long enough to write you this note. As I grow older, I often reminisce about the past. Many things have changed, and I have changed as well. That, too, is a privilege I earn thanks to you. You promised to make me immortal on the first day we met. Please forgive your incompetent student, Teacher Julius, I am not quite immortal yet. But I am working on it. Meeting you was truly my great fortune. I don't think I ever thanked you properly for everything you've done for me, so please allow me to express my gratitude in this modest way. Below, you'll find an exploration report I compiled after traveling far and wide in the dream realm, visiting places that no human has ever reached and unraveling mysteries that no one has ever been able to solve, which, in hindsight, was quite a foolish affair, considering how many times I almost fell victim to my curiosity. However, as Professor Obel used to say, humanity needs a bit of stupidity to survive. So, please, enjoy the fruits of my stupidity. Best regards, Nobody. Teacher Julius stared at the note in bewilderment. Nobody. The nobody. Had the author of the exploration report on the tomb of Ariel actually been his student once? I would have remembered such an outstanding student, surely. Completely forgetting about his schedule, Julius grabbed the leather-bound journal and read the title embossed on the cover. The exploration report on everything. Opening the journal with a trembling hand, he read the first few lines. His eyes widened like saucers. What? 2565 The exploration report on everything. Teacher Julius spent almost an hour staring just at the first page of the exploration report on everything. The first paragraph alone was enough to shatter reality as humans knew it, turning every known axiom upside down. It read, "In the beginning, there was only the boundless, eternal void. From that dark abyss, the creatures of the void were born. Just like chaos itself, they were endless and everlasting, vast and forever changing. But then came desire, and with it came direction. From it, the 7 gods were born." Julius took a shaky breath. 7 gods. But there were only 6 gods. Granted, myriad people had suggested the existence of the 7th god before, for no other reason than the prevalence of the number 7 in everything that had to do with the nightmare spell, as well as with the bygone civilizations of the dream realm. In fact, countless assumed that the mystical significance of the number 7 was connected to the fallen pantheon, that there had been 7 gods, and everything was inclined to come in sevens because of them, like a sacral echo. Of course, there was not a shred of evidence to support this fanciful theory. People just liked orderly things, and the strange contradiction of there only being 6 gods made them feel uncomfortable. So, they stretched the truth to support the conclusion they had already made. Needless to say, such conduct was woefully unscientific. Well, at least they were better than the hapless romantics who claimed that there had only been 6 gods because the 7th was yet to be born. That alleged 7th god, unsurprisingly, was supposed to be born of humanity and become its savior, which smelled suspiciously like religion, not science. Teacher Julius frowned. Can nobody be one of those hacks? No, surely not. He took a deep breath and delved into reading. The more he read, the more he was enthralled by the exploration report. Just a few minutes later, it became apparent that nobody was not a hack. The report was written in a clear, crisp language. Everything was relayed in simple words and left no room for ambiguity. The picture it painted was wonderfully coherent, so coherent, in fact, that Julius could not help but feel that what he was reading had to be true. Best of all, the exploration report was not merely a collection of curious musings. It was a proper research paper that drew from and referenced myriad established works and historical documents, as well as providing sources for every unsubstantiated claim it made. Granted, some of those sources were quite fantastical, like the description of a memory that contained a drop of shadow god's blood or a poem written by the demon of dread on the surface of a mystical lake. Julius doubted that anyone could receive such a memory again or travel to the estuary of the great river in the tomb of Aral to confirm nobody's findings. So, theoretically, the exploration report on everything could still turn out to be a fabrication, but Julius doubted that it was. The facts nobody presented and the arguments they made fit together too well, and everything clicked together too perfectly, as if falling into place. More than that, the discoveries made by the mysterious explorer flawlessly filled the holes in the contemporary understanding of the dream realm and its history. Many things had never quite fit together before, but now, Julius saw that it was because the puzzle had been missing pieces. Nobody provided these pieces, and so, it all makes sense. He felt as if he had been blind all his life, and now finally gained sight. That was the best feeling in the world, the thing that had drawn him to science and academic work, to begin with. Wonderful, simply wonderful. Not too long ago, Julius had felt like an old man. But now, suddenly, he felt like a little kid again. The exploration report on everything was broadly divided into 3 parts. The first dealt with the cosmology of the dream realm, exploring the relationship between the void and the flame, and therefore the war between the void creatures and the gods born of desire. It explained how the universal laws of existence had been created, and how the gods used them to contain the void, while imprisoning one of their own, the unknown, with it. The second part was dedicated to the unknown and his 7 children, the demons. Demons had always been the strangest and most mysterious deities among the lesser pantheon, so learning that they were fragments of a god's shattered soul was quite a revelation, one that provided a perfect explanation for why they seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and why they had been feared by the gods. Forbidden knowledge. Nobody explained in detail why most information about the 7th god was censored in his exploration report. According to him, the world denied the existence of the unknown, as willed by the gods, and no knowledge of the 7th god's identity could be retained by ordinary people. In worst cases, beholding the forbidden truth could even be a danger in and of itself. That said, the uncensored version of the exploration report on everything existed, as well. It was just that gaining access to it required passing a mysterious trial. Julius did not know what the trial was, since that knowledge was shrouded in shadows. Discovering it was a test in and of itself. So, only those who were powerful, persistent, determined, and possessed an inquisitive mind would gain the right to know the full truth. One thing Julius did know, however, was that the exploration report on everything would become a motivation to walk the path of ascension for some people. There weren't many of them, but each one was special. They were the kind of people who did not care for glory and were indifferent to the promise of power, but were burning with curiosity and the desire to solve the mysteries of the world. To those who burned with the spirit of exploration, the report written by nobody would become the Holy Grail. How exciting! At that moment, Julius recalled a particular student, for some reason. His memory was quite vague, enough so that he could not even remember their face or name, but that student would have definitely asked something like, "What the hell is a Holy Grail?" if they heard this. Nevertheless, they were the exact type of person who would endeavor to become transcendent simply to get their hands on the uncensored version of the exploration report on everything. In fact, if Julius was not too old to spend months on end in places without good plumbing, he would have been tempted to challenge a nightmare or two himself. In any case, the second part of the exploration report described the origin of demons, went into detail about the trials and tribulations each of them had endured, and concluded with the explanation of how the Doom War began, as well as describing the role a mysterious group as the Nine had played in fanning the flames of the conflict between the demons and the gods. It was one startling revelation after another. A true paradise for a researcher, and a bottomless well of shocking new truths. And then, there was the third part, which was even more earth-shattering than the previous 2. Julius actually dropped nobody's journal when he read the first sentence. It was quite a provocative statement, indeed. The nightmare spell is a lullaby that Weaver sang to tame the unknown. Picking up the exploration report with trembling hands, Julius continued to read as if possessed. No, it can't be, can it? The spell. This is the explanation of the nightmare spell. The third part of the exploration report on everything was dedicated to Weaver, the demon of fate, and the nightmare spell they had created, to lull the unknown to sleep and forge new gods to slay him. This was the most shocking collection of revelations written down by nobody, by far. The nightmare spell was the closest thing people had to a god. It governed all of the world, deciding fates as it saw fit. It was also the greatest secret in the world. But not anymore. This is. Utterly speechless, Julius closed the leather journal and stared at its cover in stunned silence. The bold title did not seem so bold anymore. The exploration report on everything. A weak smile appeared on his face. That nobody, they weren't kidding. 2566 nobody knows. Teacher Julius did not waste any time and published the exploration report in open access. He also shared the news about the groundbreaking new research paper with his fellow colleagues in the academic circles. As a result, it gained traction quite swiftly. Its veracity also did not come under too much scrutiny, considering the reputation of the man who published it. Countless people in the waking world were reading the exploration report on everything on the network, while those in the dream realm fought to get their hands on a printed copy. Some even copied it by hand, and these handwritten copies then changed hands as they were lent and borrowed from friends and acquaintances. The result was explosive. In a short while, the many mysteries revealed by nobody were all that people talked about. And it was no surprise, after all, nobody had gone and revealed the greatest secrets of the world in one fell swoop. It was no different from receiving divine scripture from a messenger from the gods. From how the world had been created to how it ended, from what forces governed all of existence to why the nightmare spell existed. There were these great revelations, and countless smaller ones, as well, things that some people here and there knew, but had never been systematically explained and placed into a coherent framework. Like which powers of the awakened came from the awakening itself and which ones were gifted to them by the spell, why nightmare creatures burned with a demented determination to destroy anything untouched by the corruption, what the shadow realm and the afterlife were, and so on. The mere fact that a thorough explanation of what happened to human souls after death did not make the front pages was insane. But it did not. The exploration report on everything was simply too astonishing. It was indeed a clear and concise explanation of everything. For a few weeks, the world has gone completely mad about the mysteries solved by nobody. Countless gatherings and televised discussion panels took place, with attendance and viewership breaking records. It was comparable, and at times more sought after, than the fateful speech made by Changing Star. These conversations were carried into the private lives of everyone, as well. Everyone was talking about nobody and their report, at the dinner table, while drinking with buddies at the bar, and even while sparring on a training field. The publication of the exploration report caused an explosion in scientific research, as well. After all, numerous academics who had been stuck in their own research gained priceless new information in a broader context that allowed them to make instant breakthroughs. Others were passionately expanding on the themes and topics touched upon in the exploration report. There were already several additional, startling discoveries made, and new ones were coming out every day. One mystery the exploration report on everything did not solve, however, was the identity of its author. Nobody knew who nobody was. But everyone wanted to find out. The discoveries made by this anonymous individual seemed too great and groundbreaking for a single person to make. And yet, all signs pointed to the fact that nobody was, indeed, a single person, a fact that was almost as astonishing as the contents of their report themselves. Speculations were abundant, and rumors about nobody rapidly went from simply far-fetched to completely ridiculous. Some said that nobody was Changing Star herself, some pointed to Song of the Fallen, some believed that nobody was the ghost of a long-dead champion of the first generation, and some even insisted that nobody was none other than the unknown himself. And that was before people even learned that there was a secret version of the exploration report that only those who are asked a mysterious trial could gain. When that piece of information was revealed, for a short while, it seemed as if the whole world became obsessed with searching for nobody. Sunny was observing all that in a dazed state. The stir caused by his academic swan song had gone far beyond his already outrageous expectations. But that wasn't even the reason for his bewilderment. No, but he glanced at the daily newspapers published in Bastion. All of them were full of articles and ridiculous insinuations about who nobody was. What the actual hell? How come? How come every persona he created for the sake of anonymity ended up being more famous than he was? First mongrel, and now nobody. Was he doing anonymity wrong? Shaking his head, Sunny put the newspapers away. Crap, now I'll actually have to come up with that trial. He had sort of assumed that there would be plenty of time to set something up, but that prediction was proving to be woefully incorrect. Well, it was not too troublesome. Sunny already had experience creating secret trials. The Shadow Clan recruited new members through a similar process. So, he could simply come up with the main points and push it off on Aiko. Taking a deep breath, he looked down at the sprawling vista of Bastion. His bewilderment slowly gave way to a wistful mood. I wonder. The exploration report on everything was merely a small project he poured his mind into in his free time, albeit it was also the culmination of his decade-long pursuit of the truth, and of all the harrowing trials he had survived. Despite that, Sunny had a strange feeling that even if he became sacred, or even divine, this would be the achievement most people would remember him by. Something that would be taught in SCHOOLs hundreds of years later and become the foundation of common knowledge, and therefore known to everyone, everywhere. So, it was more than a little bit ironic that nobody knew who nobody actually was. That nobody was a man named Sunless. But possibly it was better that way. A particular sentence suddenly came to his mind. Sunny glanced to the sky and exhaled slowly. No one knew where Weaver went and what they did. Chuckling quietly, he turned back and went about his business. As if nothing had happened. 2567 Staring Contest. The exploration report on everything had certainly caused quite a stir. Sunny had expected that he would be dealing with the consequences for quite some time, but who would have thought that something else was going to steal the spotlight in a matter of weeks? Riding across the barren expanse of the eastern quadrant, Sunny glanced at the sky and let out a wistful sigh. Mordred was a supreme now, which meant that, from the point of view of the public, he was the second sovereign of humanity. The news would spread among the population soon, and it was bound to take at least some of the attention away from the exploration report. After all, most people were more interested in the happenings of today than they were in ancient history. Come to think of it. Sunny's sigh was followed by a quiet groan. The King of Nothing, with a title like that, as well as the timing of his ascent to the throne of supremacy. Mordred was bound to be mistaken for nobody, wasn't he? Sunny remained silent for a while, swaying in the saddle. Then, he let out a chuckle and said with a hint of vindictive amusement in his voice, "Good, good. Let him draw the fire away for me." Honestly, the idea of Mordred becoming the protagonist of countless ridiculous rumors and having his name dragged through the mud by unscrupulous gossip columnists was kind of AP-roeling. The best part, though, was that the bastard would have no idea how he had ended up in that situation, and who was to blame. Imagining Mordred's expression when crowds of misguided fools kept accosting him improved Sunny's mood a lot. Wouldn't it be fun, him attaining supremacy only to find out that all people want to talk to him about is a research paper written by someone else? Knowing Mordred, that would certainly thrown him for a loop. Not only because people would keep seeking him out for strange reasons, but also because he had no idea who nobody truly was, either. Sunny let out a wicked laugh. Hearing it, Nightmare glanced back and stared at him for a moment, then turned away and let out an absolutely terrifying, chilling neigh. It seemed like he was expressing solidarity, or simply did not wish to be left out. Sunny smiled. Right, you make a good point, buddy. Sadly, his horse was not the best conversation partner, so they continued their journey in silence. And speaking of silence and bad conversation partners, Sunny's thoughts turned to a different event that had happened soon after he regained his senses. Oh, yes, there was that, as well. He thought back to a particular day on the Forgotten Shore. Sonk. Well, this is interesting. A few days after regaining consciousness, Sunny found himself in the underground hall of the Nameless Temple, far away from the bustling streets of Bastion. Granted, the streets of the Dark City were bustling, as well. Having been absent for a couple of weeks, he was behind schedule on the reconstruction efforts, so thousands of his shades were currently hard at work. He was using the simple tasks of preparing the Dark City for potential settlers to get accustomed to how vast his mind had become due to mind weave. Before, Sunny could only issue simple commands to his shades. If he wanted something more intricate to be done, he had to actively observe and instruct them. Needless to say, that slowed the work down. But now, Sunny could observe and instruct countless shades at the same time. So, the pace with which they were cleaning up the Dark City had increased tremendously. From the simple tasks like clearing the collapsed and unstable buildings to sorting out the rubble and recovering stones that could be used for constructing new ones, from digging pits to lay foundations to laying bricks, he could give thousands of commands at the same time and monitor how the shades performed to correct most mistakes before they happened. It was dizzying, wondrous, and most of all, far more efficient. I'll be able to move on to battle testing soon. The burned forest awaited. Before that, however, Sunny glanced around the vast expanse of the dark hall. Eventually, his gaze settled on the two others who were currently in the nameless temple with him. There were two taciturn beauties standing some distance away, far apart, staring at each other. They were Saint and Slayer, of course. Sunny could not really say that their gazes were heated. After all, Saint was always aloof and indifferent, while Slayer cast her dark gazes at all living beings as if they were prey, but there was definitely some kind of strange atmosphere in the air. Sunny considered it for a few moments, then turned his thoughts back to what he had been contemplating before. Slayer had spent a long time evolving in the dark flames of his soul after killing and consuming the shadow of condemnation. Her evolution only concluded during his venture into the Palace of Imagination. Saint, meanwhile, just finished hers today. They were both supreme now. And that was not all. Although Saint did not quite become a tyrant, some of her attributes have evolved, and she gained a frightening new ability. Slayer, meanwhile, after learning the name of the woman whose shadow she had been from Sunny, she showed a subtle but poignant reaction. Her gaze grew distant for a short while, and then returned to its usual feral darkness. But something about her was faintly different now. There was a difference that was unseen and hard to define with words. However, there was also a difference that was quite apparent. Slayer seemed to have regained her aspect, or a shadow of her aspect, at least. Lamb still trying to wrap my head around the implications of her abilities, of her transformation ability, most of all. Shaking his head, Sunny turned to the Onyx Saint. No, not anymore. He turned to the Jade Saint. 2568 Jade Saint. No matter how I look at it, it's weird. It wasn't supposed to be, but it unmistakably was. Saint's fearsome armor was still as black as the lightless expanse of the underworld, but underneath it, her smooth stone-like skin had become flawlessly white, like sublime jade. And although Sunny knew that it was not unreasonable, he just could not get used to the idea of it. Her skin had been gray as the Stone Saint and alabaster white as the Marble Saint, but she had been the Onyx Saint for so long that he grew accustomed to it. The jade nature of her supreme body was not the only different thing about Saint's appearance, though. She had returned to her usual height now, but immediately after completing her evolution, Saint was at least 10 meters tall, towering above him like a breathtaking monument. He had a suspicion that even that was not the limit of how tall Saint could become as long as she wished to. She had gained the ability to change her size and mass at will after absorbing the essence of one of Mordred's reflections. Now, Sunny knew that Saint could achieve that by using the negative quality of nothing. And since she had absorbed far more nothing in the Palace of Imagination, there was no telling what her true height was now. It was a far cry from the small living sculpture he found on the Forgotten Shore, who had been the same height as he was. For what it was worth, though, Saint herself seemed to prefer her usual height, which was just above Sunny. She can weigh as much as a mountain of jade, though. Quite literally, that would, without a doubt, come in handy in battle. What am I even thinking about? The changes brought about by Saint's evolution went deeper than her appearance, of course. Sunny summoned her runes, which had already been adjusted with Cassie's help to reflect the current state of Saint. They read: Shadow, Jade Saint, Shadow Rank, Supreme, Shadow Class, Devil, Shadow Attributes, War Master, Stalwart, Flame of Divinity, Heart of Darkness, Vessel of Nothing. 2 of Saint's attributes had evolved, and a new one seemed to have appeared. The Flame of Divinity was the simplest. Saint had possessed a spark of it even as an awakened. Now that she was supreme, that spark had grown into a towering flame. War Master, however, was more interesting. It was an evolution of the Battle Master attribute, and from what Cassie could glean, the change was quite intriguing. The description of the Battle Master attribute read: Born on the battlefield, the Stone Saint is proficient in all forms of combat. However, the description of the War Master attribute was different. Sunny glanced at the runes. War Master attribute description: a veteran of countless battlefields, the Jade Saint is proficient in all shapes of warfare. He was not sure what exactly it meant, however, if he was to hazard a guess, the War Master had to do with strategy and tactics as opposed to personal combat skill. It was an attribute fit for a general, not merely a foot soldier. Which was quite good news, considering that Sunny happened to be in possession of a legion that needed someone to command it. We'll have to see about it in the burned forest. And then, there was the new attribute, Vessel of Nothing. Sunny glanced at the runes. Vessel of Nothing attribute description. Nothing dwells in this shadow's body, granting her the power of annulment. It was quite a mysterious description, no doubt. Of course, Sunny had already known what it meant, that Saint had gained a measure of control over Nothing, which allowed her to contain it within herself and make use of it to pursue her goals. How exactly the ghostly mist could be used, though, apart from her ability to reduce her size and mass, the answer lay in the new ability she now possessed. Sunny looked at Saint, who was still staring at Slayer with indifference, and then turned around to the runes. Shadow abilities. Weapon Sage Underworld Armament Mantle of Darkness Blade of Darkness Shield of Nothing. Shield of Nothing. Sunny concentrated on the new ability and read its description. Shield of Nothing ability description. Nothing protects this shadow, and as long as it does, no one can harm her. These words were both vague and provocative. The reality of what Shield of Denial did, however, was both less grand than what the description implied, and far more fearsome. The Shield of Denial was not a literal shield. Rather, it was a power that Saint wielded now, a field of annulment. And what that field did was deny everyone their own powers when they faced her in combat. As long as Saint sustained the Shield of Annulment, the aspects of Awakened and the unholy powers of the nightmare creatures, as well as their attributes, the very things that made them extraordinary, would either be heavily suppressed or outright negated around her. It was a bit like what Moonveil could achieve as long as she made her target bleed. It was also a bit like the foundation the War Realm had been built upon. Needless to say, it was a frightening power. Saint had always excelled in defense, but now, her conservative battle style had reached its culmination. After all, was there a better defense than denying the enemy their offensive ability? Sunny, for one, would not want to clash with someone like Saint while denied both his aspect and his attributes. Not that there was anyone like Saint out there, in either of the worlds. And on top of that, she now possessed the strength of a supreme creature. Her will was also exceptionally strong enough that she had been completely immune to most forms of mind and soul attacks as a mere awakened. Sunny smiled. I think we will raise hell, the two of us. The last change was not written in the runes, rather, it was the lack of runes that had been there before that announced it. The counter of shadow fragments that used to be at the very end of the field of shimmering runes was gone. It was not replaced by a new one, either, it was simply not there anymore. Sunny was not sure what it meant, but it seemed like Saint, or any shadow, perhaps, would not be able to become sacred through usual means. That made sense, sadly. Apotheosis was not something one could achieve through quantity, after all. It was the quality that mattered. Throwing one last look at Saint, Sunny failed to suppress a smile and turned to Slayer. His smile grew a little strained. This one had grown quite a bit more powerful, as well. 2569 Demon Slayer. Sunny often wondered what powers Orphney of the Nine had wielded. After all, her shadow was already one of the deadliest things he had ever faced without them. It was no coincidence that Sunny called her Slayer. Just how fearsome the original had been. Orphney was one of the two known beings in all of history who had managed to kill a demon, after all. The other one was Weaver, and she had killed Weaver. In fact, she had killed Weaver twice, so what did that make her? To his surprise, though, her aspect was not at all what he had expected. Sunny had thought that she would possess an immensely powerful combat aspect, or at least one focused on death and killing, but that was not the case at all. If anything, Slayer's powers were the antithesis of that. Her aspect was focused on utility, with hardly any combat applications. More than that, at its core, it was an aspect meant to promote understanding and harmony. At least that was the impression Sunny had gotten after Cassie transcribed the runes for him. Of course, the powers Slayer had reclaimed after remembering the name of the woman who had cast her were not entirely the same as Orphney's aspect had been. After all, Orphney had been a human. Slayer, however, was a shadow creature. Had been a shadow creature before Sunny killed her and made her his shadow, rather. It was a bit complicated. What it is ridiculous, not complicated, he smiled faintly. Orphney of the Nine had been a mortal woman, and like all mortals, she had a shadow. Shadows traveled to the Shadow Realm after the death of mortals who cast them, but Orphney had descended into the Shadow Realm alive, and died there side by side with the Demon of Fate. Her shadow remained in the Shadow Realm, but it did not surrender to the laws governing the afterlife and refused to be annihilated. Instead, it roamed the dark expanse of the realm of the dead for thousands of years, hunting down other shadows to sustain itself. Eventually, the feral shadow of Orphni of the Nine became a shadow creature. A kind of being who were born from the shadows of the dead, but were distinctly different from them, like Nightmare. That shadow creature was eventually killed by Sunny and turned into one of his shadows. And his shadows were all shadow creatures themselves, by definition, sort of. They were apparently incomplete, whatever that meant, and were neither mere shadows of the dead nor independent shadow creatures. Sunny winced as if in pain. Shadow God was truly a great and awesome god. But his naming sense was terrible. Perhaps that was one of the reasons Sunny had ended up receiving his blessing and becoming a shadow slave, as well. Wait, if Slayer is the shadow of a shadow creature of a shadow of a mortal woman, then what the hell was Sunny himself? He made a face, trying to define his own existence. It seemed that he was a mortal man who had become a shadow creature with the help of the Nightmare spell and a blessing from Shadow God, then killed himself and became a shadow, then made himself into a shadow creature once again while attaining supremacy. Coincidentally, he had once descended into the shadow realm alive, too. Now, though, no trace of his mortal self remained, he was truly and utterly a creature of shadows, born from the shadow of a dead man. In a new case, as a shadow creature, Slayer did not wield a true aspect, and neither did she possess a true flaw. Rather, she wielded powers that were derived from the aspect of her original source, Orphni of the Nine. The God Slayer. The Demon Slayer. Orphni did not have a title because no one had been alive to tell the tale of her incredible and terrible deeds. She had performed them at the world's end, after all. In fact, it was her hand that had set the end of days in motion. Few beings could boast of causing the deaths of all the gods and all the demons with one strike of their blade, but Orphni could. Which only made the fact that his aspect had nothing to do with death and combat so much more poignant. Slayer's first ability was quite an odd one. It allowed her to understand and communicate with all manner of beasts and living creatures, as well as comprehend human languages. Humans were beasts as well, after all. An ability like that certainly had its uses, and while Sunny had benefited greatly from having learned a few dead languages himself, how could he put it? He would not have wanted to receive an ability like that as a sleeper. The world was too violent and cruel a place for a power that only encompassed communication. It was an ability suited for peace, but life was war. Slayer's second ability greatly enhanced all her senses. That one was far more useful, and could explain how she was so eerily accurate when shooting a bow over vast distances, great in laying ambushes, and almost impossible to catch unaware. Her third ability was the only one that could be considered a direct combat one. It allowed her to imbue her attacks with soul essence, making them more potent. That one reminded Sunny of Samara and her powerful rifle, so he felt wistful while reading the runes. The method is similar, but the results should be different. I will have to watch Slayer fight to understand more. Samara's ability had been straightforward. It allowed her to charge objects with her essence and then convert that essence into kinetic or heat energy. Slayer's ability, however, was more mystical. So, he could not immediately understand its nuances. It was curious, though, that Slayer had not used that power before. She seemed to have retained some measure of her first two abilities as a feral shadow, but not of the other ones. Now that she had regained more of her former self, though, that was going to change. And then there was Slayer's fourth ability. That one intrigued Sunny the most. 2570 Shapeshifter. Slayer's fourth ability, which corresponded to Orphni's transcendent one, was easy at first sight. In fact, Sunny could have already guessed what it was, having seen it in the visions bestowed upon him by Ariel's game. It allowed her to take the shape of beasts she had seen, heard, smelled, touched, or whose flesh and blood she had tasted. She was a shapeshifter. Such a transformation ability was certainly versatile, and could be a powerful weapon when faced with a certain kind of adversary, but that was not what piqued Sunny's interest. Instead, it was the fact that Slayer was a being who had existed for thousands of years, and had therefore met and killed a great number of beasts, and the fact that the definition of beasts the runes described was quite vague. Their direct meaning was bestial things, which was not exactly precise. He had seen her take the shape of a hawk, as well as of a fearsome black leopard powerful enough to kill one of the sacred spirits of Heart God's forest. Who knew what other shapes she could assume? Could she turn into a nightmare creature? Most monsters fit the definition of a bestial thing despite not being beasts. Humans, meanwhile, were beasts, but not bestial things. Most humans weren't, at least. What about other kinds of creatures? Could Slayer take transcendent forms of human saints, as long as they were bestial? Could she take the shape of mythical beasts? For example, could Slayer turn into a dragon? Sunny gave her a long look. It was full of suspicion. I'd better keep her away from Kai, just in case. He shivered. And nightmare. One hellish horse is enough. Slayer ignored his pointed gaze, continuing to stare at Saint with her usual air of cold malice. Sunny smiled and leaned back. She had a fifth ability, as well, although it was unlike those of human supremes. Slayer was not a sovereign, after all, and neither was she a tyrant. So, she had no domain and did not rule over anyone. Her fifth ability was connected to the very essence of supremacy, instead, to the will. Just like the supreme abilities of sovereigns, it seemed like the extension and culmination of her other powers. It allowed her to clearly sense and understand the will of other beings, as well as communicate her own better. She could imbue her weapons with her will in a direct manner, for example, making them that much more deadly. It's interesting. Slayer's powers, unlike her personality, were more subtle and understated rather than fierce and furious. Despite the nature of her aspect, though, Orphney had been far more lethal than any other human Sunny knew of, and had achieved far more frightening feats. An aspect was not complete without a person's attributes, though. It was Slayer's attributes that made her powers shine, one of them in particular. Sunny knew that Orphney of the Nine had possessed an attribute similar to his own, his former greatest benefactor and most terrible foe, Fated. However, Slayer did not. Whether it was because Slayer was not the same being as the original Orphney or because she had already fulfilled her fate, he did not know. In any case, he was thinking of a different attribute, an attribute that seemed to explain the unique composition of her soul, the fatal purity of her battle technique, as well as why she had been able to persist in the Shadow Realm for thousands of years without being consumed by it. It was called Pure Soul. Orphney of the Nine had possessed a pure and unyielding soul that shone with stunning light and refused to be blemished. That, perhaps, was the source of her tenacious resolve and single-minded determination, as well as why Slayer was always able to be true to herself, both in thought and in action. And that, in turn, was the reason she had been able to persist in her quest to slay the demon of fate until both of them perished, even as the world was coming undone around them. That was also the reason why her soul shone with pure light even after she became a shadow, and why she had been able to withstand the jaws of the Shadow Realm for thousands of years. That attribute had a more practical side to it, as well. After all, one of Slayer's powers allowed her to imbue her attacks with soul essence, and her soul essence was similarly pristine, and therefore far more potent. Her will was pure and sincere, too, and thus could be expressed more effectively. Who could have thought? The most accomplished killer in the world was also the most sincere person in the world. Sunny was not sure if that was deeply fitting or reflected poorly on what kind of world they all lived in. Regardless of that, he felt lucky that Slayer had not possessed these powers when they fought atop the shadow of condemnation. Feeling fortunate to have survived that encounter, he glanced between Slayer and Saint with a thoughtful expression. Sunny was quite curious which of these two supreme shadows would win if they were to duel. His money was on Saint, probably, since her powers lent themselves better to direct combat. Slayer was a fearsome fighter, as well, but she excelled in subterfuge more than she did in direct confrontations. She was first and foremost a huntress, not a warrior. That said, he could not be sure. After all, Slayer could simply summon wings and fly high into the sky, then unleash a barrage of arrows at Saint from dozens of kilometers away. If Saint summoned her true darkness to blind her, she could continue to fight by relying on her other senses. Hell, she could probably shapeshift into a dark drifter, the eerie creature of darkness Sunny and Slayer had fought in the Shadow Realm, and be just as at home in the embrace of true darkness as Saint was. Well, that was before Saint raised her shield of nothing to negate Slayer's powers. Sunny was not sure who would win that fight, but he was certainly curious to see. I won't be seeing it today, though. After all, he was too busy to procure another citadel. And even if he did not know how the battle of two supreme shadows would end, he knew that it would definitely reduce the nameless temple to rubble. Some other time, then.